Today I'm going to talk about my first impression of my new bike. I will be doing some comparisons to my old bike, my 790 Adventure R. And I'm going to show you all the modifications I've done to the bike. First of all, I want to start out with the seat. I get a lot of questions about the seat, and I'm not sure if it's uncomfortable or it's not just me that is not used to this type of seat. I really enjoy the seat on the 790 Adventure R. I felt that was really comfortable for me personally, and I know this is a highly individual thing. I need to ride it way more before I can conclude if it's uncomfortable or comfortable. I highly recommend you guys to just give it a try yourself. The seating position is really comfortable for me. With my 200 centimeters, the way my knees, the angle of my knees and how my foot are resting on the foot pegs, I find really comfortable on this bike. The brake and gear lever are easy to reach, and my knee fits really well behind the bulky tank. I know this has been a concern for many, but I'm used to a wide tank on my previous bikes. So I don't feel this to be an issue, but I do understand some may find it a little bit uncomfortable. But my legs should not be much taller before it could be a problem or issue with me hitting the side of the tank. It has a much more neutral sitting position than on my KTM 790. It's not that aggressive, so it feels really good to ride on longer trips, and I really love the short distance you have to go from standing to sitting position. And I think this is the first bike straight out of the shop that had fit me so well that I didn't have to do any adjustments. So on the KTM I had to lower the foot pegs and put bar risers on the handlebars. But this bike just fit me really well. The only thing I had to do was to tilt up the handlebars a little bit so I got a better angle for the brake and clutch lever. The sitting position is way better than on my old KTM. Next up, wind protection. Well, how can I put this? For me, this is kind of a little bit of a mixed bag, because when I'm sitting down riding, the wind are reflected just above my helmet or into my peak, but it doesn't give me any wobble or like my head will be shaky, and it doesn't create any noise. But on the side here, the wind reflects to the side and hit the mirrors and come in and hit me in the chest. It's not like it's a problem in high speed, but it makes for a little bit of sound when you're riding. So if you're not riding with earplugs, you may notice this really well when you're riding in high speeds. I think the air protection and weather protection is better on the World Raid than the original T7. I had the pleasure of riding the demo bike at the Yamaha Bergen a couple of times, and I felt like the wind was hitting me in a different way on that bike compared to this one. Next up is brake and clutch, and finally a front brake that works. Not like the shitty laggy brakes on my 790. Damn, that was terrible. It was, you get used to it, so you don't know how bad it is before you try something that is better. But the kind of like in the slow speeds on the KTM was horrible. I'm pleased to say the brakes on the T7 are really good. The rear brake lever, on the other hand, is quite soft, so you have to push it. It has a long travel, so when you push the brakes, it's kind of like it's almost not biting at all, and then it's completely locked. So I really struggle to get a good feel for how to operate the back brake. And yeah, take notes, KTM. a brake fluid reservoir that does not leak. On my KTM, I think I changed the gasket and the lid on my bike 3 times and it still had a leakage. So that was incredibly annoying. I see a lot of people adding longer clutch arm on the engine. For me, I like the way the clutch are on this bike. It had a short distance, so it's kind of snappy to and have a good response. I do understand in heavy off-road stuff there where we have to how to say it, slure clutchen, as we say in Norwegian. You really need to operate the clutch a lot. I see that this can be an issue, but the clutch lever is so soft and smooth and it's not nowhere near how I was used to it on the KTM. I may change to a shorter clutch and brake lever. I have to see. I'm not sure if I want to spend money in it because it's no problem to operate these long ones with 2 fingers. Well, guess what, KTM? It is possible to make a good TFT display that does not fog down every time the weather change, even if you state otherwise. I think the display is really good. It's not much fuss. It's quite easy to read, even if in bright sunlight. I like the precision of the TFT display. I like how easy it is to read. You have a good visual gear indicator and you have the time. I don't need much more than that. So I love the simplicity of this dashboard and I really like the upgrade from the original T7. If you turn off the ABS, it will reset every time you turn the key or you hit the kill switch. And we have the ABS on button down here. Every time you turn off anything with the ABS, you can just stop the bike, push it, and everything goes back to normal. We have the long and waited upgrade for the suspension on this bike. The suspension are really good. It's still really hard on the smaller bumps in the road. It's almost like the spring is tighter in one end and more far between in the other end. So all the small stuff is quite hard on the, but when you start getting into bigger bumps, it had way more travel and it feels way more smooth. I wasn't used to that when I first tried the bike. But after riding it for a while, I quite like that, to be honest. The suspension on my 790 is way better. It's no comparison, to be honest. I'm not a suspension guy. I don't know too much of the tech details about it. I'm glad to say that the suspension on this bike are more than good enough for my usage. The front suspension is much stiffer and it's much more neutral. So when I hit the brakes hard, it's the bike feels much more firm. It doesn't dip as much in the front as I was used to with the T7. All in all, it's a noticeable upgrade on the suspension. I'm not sure how good it is compared to the T7. I haven't ridden the T7 original too much, but I don't think it will be necessary to do any upgrades on it. I know Adam at the Rally Raid in UK. He is doing some investigation on the suspension on the bike he's got. So I can't wait to see how that goes along. And the same goes for the rear suspension. It is soft but still a little bit hard. I feel every time you sit down on the bike it don't flex too much like I felt it did on the T7. But Again, I'm not a suspension guy. I'm not qualified at all to have too much to say about the suspension other than I quite like it. I do feel the suspension on my 790 was a little bit better. Suspension is way too important to ignore, and I do understand why so many on the original T7 upgraded their suspension. And now to the engine. And I have to say, this is by far my biggest surprise. If you look at the spec sheets, there's no doubt the 790 Adventure R is a much better bike. It has better suspension, it has more horsepower, it delivers much more torque, and everything spec to spec is better on the 790. But the playfulness in this engine, the way the sound of it, how smooth it is, and how good and strong it is in the low and the middle range. Yes, it loses a little bit on top compared to the KTM, or how to say it, if let's say on the KTM I only used 30% of the engine and the raw power that lives in that engine. On this bike I utilize 70%. It's much more playful. It is you ride it in a much different way. It reminds me a little bit of the BMW with the Boxer engine. It's kind of fast but in a slow way. The linear power deliverance of the engine is yeah, it's quite amazing, and I finally start to realize what the fuss is all about. I do understand much better now why so many favorite this bike and why so many people change to the T7. I think I'm going to be heavily invested in the dark side. Yeah, and another thing I get a lot of questions about. Do you feel that it's top heavy? Yes, it's quite noticeable when the tank is full. How much compared to the original T7, I can't say too much about because I haven't owned the T7 myself. I haven't ridden it enough, but I can feel it on this bike. I don't feel it's a problem, but when you can feel it sometimes in the turns, especially off-road or on this track here, you can feel that it want to tip over in a certain characteristics. You also probably want to know, is it heavy to lift up? Yeah, it's heavy or not heavy. It depends on the technique. I don't think this bike is anything worse to lift up than any other bike. And as you can see, I already tipped it over. Thankfully, it was in low speed. But the one thing that surprised me a lot was how well the protection on the side held up. As you can see on the side, it didn't damage the exhaust, and it didn't hit any other things than the protection and the plastic cover underneath on the tank. And I get a couple of questions about the sound of the bike and how that compares. And I know that it's really hard to give a good impression of how the bike sounds on camera, but I will start it up, rev it a little bit, but I have to say there is no competition. The sound on the T7 is so much better than the KTM. And I get a lot of questions about how I like the tires. On tarmac, wet and dry, they are absolutely fantastic. I really like them. On gravel, on the other hand, I feel like the front tire feels a little bit slippery on the tight corners, almost like the front end are going to wash out. So I'm not sure if it's just a new tire that I'm not used to, or the tire is this bad. And it's the same thing with the rear tire. It holds up really well on wet and dry tarmac. A good profile. I like how easy it leans in and out of corners. But on gravel, I just feel like it had good grip on the straights, but in the corners, I feel like the grooves on the side are just a little bit too narrow. So that kind of slips out all the time as well. I feel like I'm spinning way more I have mixed feelings of them yet, but I will run them till they wear out, and I will change over to my favorite tires, and I'll have to do a comparison later on. I got some questions online, and one of the questions was about my luggage system. I have the Perun luggage rack, rear and side, and on smaller adventures or day trips I just bring my Enduristan Tornado small on the rear like this, and I have my tripod. I always bring my camera gear. And I do have the Moskomoto Nomad or Nomax tank bag, as it's called now, that holds most of my camera gear. And I got another question about remote adventures. Which bike would I choose if I went on a longer remote adventure? The T7 World Raid or my KTM 790? And I think that is a dead given. I would pick the Yamaha any given day because the reliability of the KTM are so poor. There's always something dodgy about that bike. And the last questions I got that I don't think I have answered with this video is, how is the fit and finish on the bike? I feel like the overall material used on the bike are quite good. I like the way they have reinforced this front so it won't wobble as much. There's also, most bolts on the bike are hex bolts, except this little plastic cover on the side here that has Torx. I don't understand why. Yamaha probably had a reason, but almost all the bolts on the bike, as far as I have touched, is hex. But yeah, some here on the plastic as well are Torx, but most others are hex. How easy it is to mount stuff, accessories, I feel it's the same. It's like with all the other bikes you have. I feel it's really easy to mount the bark busters and the headlight protection. I changed the exhaust. Everything is kind of easy access. The only thing that I felt was a little bit pain was the tile taddy, because there was so many bolts you need to dismantle to get that crap off before you can put it back on again. I mounted the heated grips from Daytona, and you just press it, hold it in for 5 seconds, and it turns on. And I really like the button is flushed into the grip, so it's really easy to operate and to use while you're riding without a bulky thing on next to the handlebar. I mounted the Barkbuster handguards because I do believe those are the best in class, and I think they look really good on the bike as well. I mounted the clamp from Perun Moto to fit my Garmin Sumo on top of the dashboard, and I think that as well fits really nice above the TFT display. I installed the headlight protector, that is the original one from Yamaha, and I installed the bash plate from Adventure Spec. That one also fit really well. It's the Euro 5 version of the bash plate. I really love Adventure Spec's stuff. The only issue with this bash plate, it is meant to fit the old Tenere 700, and with the new coolant tank down below, I think it will be an issue with the bash plate so low. So I hope there will come an alternative that covers the coolant tank a little bit better. I mounted the grip pads from Yamaha on side of the bike. That makes my legs a little bit more friction between my legs and the side of the bike when I'm standing up riding. I mounted the luggage rack and side racks from Perun Moto. I really like the small footprint of the luggage rack. I think that looks really great on the bike, and I think my setup fits really well onto the luggage rack as well. I installed the upper bar clamp on my handlebars from Perun Moto as well. I'm planning on mounting a bracket so I can mount my drone controller on the bike, so it's much easier to control the follow me function on the DJI Mavic Air 2 drone that I used to film with. And I fitted the tail taddy from Adventure Spec. I'm happy to see that isn't too short, so it still prevents the dirt from getting up in your neck and on your back. And I mounted the Black Widow exhaust from UK. It's a really cheap option, and it looks almost exactly the same as my SC project pipe from Italy, so I had on my KTM.